below there are the following lectures on this tape. Is a longtime member of the National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors, attending many regional and chapter meetings in order to keep in close contact with the heartbeat of clock and watch collectors and dealers. He travels extensively each year, attending NAWCC marts, antique shows, gun shows, flea markets, and so forth, buying, selling, and trading clocks and watches. He was awarded an NAWCC fellowship in 1977 in recognition of his contribution to his fellow collectors, and in 1981 was elected a director of that association. He receives many requests from various regionals and chapters to participate in their meetings as a guest speaker, and is internationally known as an authority in the field of clocks and watches. The lectures that you will hear were recorded live at some of those meetings.
Now I'll turn this over to Roy and let him get on with the program. Is there any other questions, anything anybody would like to say? Roy.
You,
See his shirt tails hanging out. You must have another one that's short.
okay. The people that's truly interested in our club is in this room, right there. Any questions about what we're going to do? All right. My name is Roy Ehrhardt. I'm speaking to the Antique Watch and Clock Club of Kansas City on May 1st, 1983. It's being videotaped by Red Rebenek, Malvern Red Rebenek, well known to all of you clock collectors for his part with the price guides. The title of the program is Why, What, and How to Collect. I'm going to give you some reasons. They're not necessarily in their order of importance, but these questions or these topics that I'm going to cover are the ones that I'm asked most about. The first one, and I think foremost in everybody's mind, no matter what else they tell you, is value appreciation. What are these things going to be worth? Can I build an estate? Are they going to be worth more than what I paid for them? Are they worth what I'm paying for them now? I can tell you from first-hand experience, a lot of people in the past 10 or 15 years have become millionaires over collecting. I know for sure watches, and I can't speak for the clocks, but I know some of them personally. I got a break right here, Red. You'll just have to cut the damn thing or something. I was giving you the reasons of why to collect. We said value appreciation, build an estate, pride of ownership. You call up you find this grand thing, and you call up your friend and say, hey, good buddy, I got this real neat thing. And of course, all you do is making him mad when you call him. But that's the whole point. That you got to aggravate him a little bit. That's very important in collecting. One-upmanship. The competition among friends, that gets into it. You know? Miles don't collect nothing. But a lot of guys in here do collect. And some of our heavy hitters are not here. Some of our heavy hitters are here. There's collections in this room that would knock your hat to creep if you just knew about it. Guarantee you. Education and knowledge. That's another reason to collect. You can't really collect successfully without it, unless you have a dealer that you can trust. Now that dealer that you can trust is very important. Me and Larry, a lot of guys don't like to hear this, but me and Larry has been for the last 2 or 3 years, and there's other guys in here that does it also. I'm not going to call any names, because if I started calling names, the ones I didn't call it be embarrassed, and the ones I did call it be embarrassed. We've been given a guaranteed buyback to new collectors. You buy something from us, you keep it as long as you want to, you bring it back. Nobody ever brings anything back. You'd be surprised. Them that do, they just want to try you out to see if you're really going to do it. So there's not really no trouble with it. Also, there's your nesting instinct. I'm sure you all know what that is. Gather all this stuff up around you. You know, you come out to my place and you know what I'm talking about. Building a nest. Diversion. Relieves boredom. A lot of people have real strenuous jobs, real hard jobs to do. And they can get relief from that. Red's over there pointing at himself. So is Kim. Probably one of the most interesting aspects of collecting is something you never realize. It reduces everybody till they're equals. The poor junkman, the blue collar, the world famous, the millionaires are all equal when it comes to collecting. You had millionaires walking the floors this morning. Some 20, 30 million. Walking the floor this morning. They're all, it's an equalizer. And you can think back that all the good stuff found in the world, usually, the really good stuff, the really moonshots, picked up by the junk dealers. And that guy, I don't care if he's the king of Siam, will look you up if you got it. You might not never be able to get an appointment with him, but you call him up and tell him you've got something you want, he'll see you right then. Presidents, it makes no difference what. You've got what they want. There's never a boring moment. Never a dull day. There's always a friend to call, a trade to make, research to do. There's always something to do. And that's probably one of the most important aspects of it. Okay, how to collect. One of the most important parts and one of the things that we probably overlook is set a budget. Each of us in here are at a certain level. We can only collect at a certain level. Some of us can spend $25 a week, some 100, some 1,000, some 10,000 a week. Decide which level you want to collect at. Now, I've had a lot of complaints, and they're justified, because all the programs I've given up to now, I've told you that 7, 11, and 15 jewel watches are junk. That's not so. Everything in this room is collectible. Everything in here. I don't care if it's brand new. Tammy and Dave's got a whole bunch of new watches over there, straight from Hong Kong. They'll be collectible. I guarantee you. Some of them ain't going to run very long. Some of them bad design, even some they've got. And one day they'll be collectible. Okay, first set yourself a budget. Then set out to study what you want to collect. Probably you should collect something that you're comfortable with. Now, what do you like? It's easy to collect something that you like. Don't pay more for it than you're comfortable with on your shelf. You know, I've got some things sitting on my shelves at home I am not comfortable with. I pay too plain much money for them. You usually don't find that out until afterwards. And you're not going to be able to do it without that happening to you. I hate to keep referring to Miles. Miles is a very good example. Pete is too. Peter Plains over here. I forgot to introduce you. Peter Plains from Miami, Florida. The most successful young man I know. He owed me $50. You take 25. Miles runs watches on his list. They don't sell. Miles sells them. He gets another bunch of watches and he runs them on the list. They don't sell. He sells them. Does he sell them? What does he do? Does he take a loss? Does he try to get his money back? Whenever he's got something, and when Larry's got something, and Wingate's got something, and anybody in here that's got something that won't sell, you know, you fool with it. Get rid of it. You can't possibly make a profit on everything you buy. There's no way. So get rid of it. Now, if you want to collect it, Sometimes I say my collection's made up of stuff I can't sell. That may be true. Okay, what to collect? Try to look at the future. Try to predict the future. We can all predict the past. It's easy. We need to predict yesterday. Try to predict the future. What do you think they're going to be looking for? That's in your budget. First of all, you got to operate in your budget. I can give you some ideas. Most of you have heard them already. You could almost come in here. I'm not going to say you make 10% a year or anything like that. You got to forget that, because there's a lot of other things that goes with collecting that we've already talked about. You could almost come in here and buy anything on these tables and pay what's being asked for it, hold it for 10 years and make money on it. But there are some categories, and it has to do with education. So you're going to have to educate yourself. If I was going to start collecting right now and liked key wines, American key wines, I'd buy American key wines. You could buy them off these tables here for practically nothing. They're old. They got all of the things that make up a good collectible. I'm only going to give you the one example because there's plenty of others. But set your goals. I'm not going to use this man's name, but he is one of the foremost pocket watch collectors in the United States. I had a long talk with him not long ago, and this program is a result of that. He said, when I started collecting, I could afford and was doing at the time a savings bond a week, which was $18.75. And he said, I began to get a little smarter. I was in advertising, and I could see that we had inflation and all these things. And I knew that in the 10 years, my $18.75, even though it was supposed to be worth $25, wouldn't be worth $18.75. So I started buying $25 items and tried to buy one a week. Well, the things he collects now are in the $10,000 range, but that's still his budget. He has some of those things that he bought and he kept them, and they have appreciated in value. Some of them didn't. He said, I didn't do my homework. I didn't do the research. He said, I spent a lifetime doing the research. But with the opportunities that you have now, there's price guides on almost any subject that you want. Some are good, some are bad, some are in between. But they're all better than having nothing. So, decide what you want to do, begin to learn about it. Now, you've decided what you're going to want to collect, and you've decided on your budget. There's a way to speed that up. Buy anything that's underpriced. It makes no difference what it is. You're there, you don't have anything better to do, you've got the money in your pocket, and even though you don't want that 21-201 special, you know that there's a guy across town that does, and he'll pay you $25 more than this guy's asking for it. Buy the watch, carry it over to him, sell it to him, take the $25 and use it on what you collect. You can do it with clocks, you can do it with barbed wire, you can do it with anything. It takes knowledge. Whenever you go to buy something, you're buying it for sale, either make sure that you're buying it way under the market or know somebody you can sell it to, or you're going to be a collector of that thing. I don't care how rare, how old, how valuable you think it is. If you don't have a buyer, it has no value. It has no value if you don't have a buyer. There's watches in here today that's 300 years old. They're priced at $40. You say, that's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. Paul Dunn's got something. But he hasn't sold it. Age hasn't got a thing to do with it. That's the best example that I could possibly give. Right in this room. I started when I was 19. I'm not going to bore you with my life history. But I started when I was 19 with cars. I could afford to buy a 1941 Chevrolet or 1939 Pontiac, drive it 100 miles and make $50 on it. That's what I did. I had a lot of time on my hands with the job that I had, and I was driving around all these garage sales and stuff, didn't know what I was looking at. Me and my wife decided we'd find out what we was looking at. You come to our house, we have a whole wall of books. Books on everything almost that it's possible to buy a book on. We ain't too smart on a lot of things. You can't possibly learn all that stuff. But if you go somewhere And the guy's got this thing, this Oriental rug or whatever it is, and it looks to be underpriced, and you've got a little time. You go home and you take a look. Yep, it's underpriced. I'll never forget one time I was in a basement, and I went home and told Alpha Lee, I said, there's a lady over there with a leaded glass lamp in the basement. She wants $100 for it. She said, where is it? I said, it's still over in the basement. She says, get in the car and get back over there. Get that. That's a true story. Most I ever made on any single item that I ever bought, $14,735. I paid that's not right, $13,275. I bought a pocket watch at a meeting like this for the difference between that and, I'll get that price right in a minute. I sold it for $15,000 and give $2.25 for it. You can figure it out. There wasn't any of those here today that I saw. Not here. He brought me one the other way. You see where the challenge is? Nobody can know everything. Absolutely no one can know everything. But man, the opportunities that are out there boggles your mind. Absolutely. And pocket watches is one of the least known collectibles that you can get a lot of money for instantly that there is. There's more opportunities in pocket watches than anything else. Absolutely. I can prove it day after day after day. And most of the guys that are interested in seeing this thing go can prove it also. Now, you as a collector will always know more than the dealer. You were saying that's a bunch of baloney. If that's so, you're not a collector. You're a trader. You haven't done your homework. If you're a collector of a certain thing, you know more than any dealer that you're dealing with. Because the dealer has to deal with everything. The collector is dealing only with this small area that he's interested in. Now, he may have some stuff that he knows more about. The one advantage the dealer has over the buyer is that the dealer's had it longer. You know, he's had time to research it. Maybe he got good information, maybe he didn't. I'll guarantee you good information is hard to get, especially if the guy you're asking thinks he's got a chance to buy it. Think about that for a minute. When a guy comes up and asks me what something's worth, what's the first question I ask him? Are you buying it, or do you want to sell it, or do you want to keep it? Now, there's three different answers to the same question. I mean, I could give three different answers to the same question. And they would all be the true answer. There's collecting categories. Probably the greatest one in pocket watches is railroad watches. Then you break the railroad watches down. There's a number in it. You could collect just fun specials and run clean out of money a dozen times in the next 5 years. I'm talking about guys that make $30,000 or $40,000 a year. So the best thing to do is specialize in something. This is what you're striving to collect. You get a thrill out of filling in a space. That's what made coin collecting, stamp collecting for years and years. Of course, it was at a low level and everybody could participate. You got to have a little bit of money to participate in watch collecting at a very high level. But man, everybody can do it because those moonshots are out there. They're absolutely out there. It's like selling insurance. Bang on 10 doors, sell one. Bang on 10 doors, sell one. You may bang on 100 doors before you get that one. But you'll get it because it's out there. The guy that's selling it don't have any books. He don't know anything. He never will know anything. You just got to put yourself in the position when that thing's for sale. He says, I want $50 for it. You got to know whether it's worth $50 or $5,000. And if you don't know, you walk away. Education is the one thing that can't get loose from you. You get it up here, and it becomes power. Until it gets up here, it's worthless. You either got to know it up here or know where you can find out. You guys got your cards all filled out? Yeah. what's your question?
Don't have any.
All right, well, that, other than getting the thing signed off, that I don't think, Red, that's been a prank. But anyway, we'll take a couple questions, we'll go back to trading.
I want to know what the watch was you made the money on.
Now you're in.
The one he got from me.
That ain't fair. I don't mean to do that.
IRS record would show that, wouldn't it?
Sure. Certainly would. It was 57 model Waltham, Pennsylvania Railroad. The only one that's ever showed up.
Apple Tracy does.
Apple and Tracy. It's the second or third watch that's pictured in the encyclopedia. Yep. And you can buy one today if you can find it.
Knew it had to be one of the Waltons
Yeah.
that time.
You can find it today. You could buy it in here if it was here. But rare's still rare. But rare is not unique in watches. There's almost as much stuff rare as there is common. But it's your ability to recognize it when you see it. Please take your cards now and write on them things that you would have liked me to have covered. And we'll try to perfect this thing, and then you can take the thing and put it on your video recorder. All of you've got one. If you won't, you will have one, because they're getting so cheap now, everybody will have one. You can take the thing and we'll try to get as many programs as we can. We cannot build this club without education. When I look around the room right here, I know how many of you was here at our first meeting. We had 8 people at the first meeting. And look how many people we had come today. Most of it's been done by education. We got people here that are dealers that had never fooled with watches at that time. Thank you. Two pages out of the encyclopedia. It's been worked on by many people over the past 2 years, these 28 things. When the slides come on the screen that's full of writing, you won't be able to read it. We'll only deal with the first, well, the words that are in bold. Now, I hope to be able to help you improve your collection this morning, be it clocks, watches, or whatever you collect. There's 2 very important things that are involved in the value of something. That's first, get it properly identified, and second, find a willing buyer. If either of those are missing, the article you're trying to dispose of has no value. So, identification first, finding a buyer second. Now, how are you clock people going to improve your collection through watches? Okay, keep in mind everybody has to be somewhere all the time. You're looking at watches and you don't know what they are. You can't identify them. It's important that you're able to identify them. I'll show you some watches that can put 200 kitchen clocks in your collection. American watches, if you can find one, and then find the buyer. When I give you values, it's based on retail value. What's the definition of retail? Actually, I should say retail collector value. The definition of retail collector value is the price a collector will pay that has the money and wants it to a dealer who knows its value. In other words, has nerve enough to ask you its value. auction prices and deals among people who have no concept of supply and demand is not included in my talk. It is only among people who are knowledgeable. Okay, Red, you can pause it till I get started. $25 Joule Pennsylvania Special. This watch was found in a gold buyer's shop somewhere in Ohio. Identification became an important factor with this watch. There was 12 of these made. There's been 3 of them turned up. And you can buy $100 kitchen clocks with this watch if you can find one and find a willing buyer. There are 7 or 8 more out there. Here's the dial that goes on it. Everything has to be proper, the dial and the movement. In this instance, the special case is not important. How can you hear back there?
Fine.
The collectability and value of any pocket watch is only in the mind of the buyer. This isn't a can of beans or a pair of overalls or a new car. You can't go to 20 dealers and check the value. I walked by a table one time, theoretically, and looked at these 2 watches. They both had a price tag of $225 on them. I could see no difference on a casual inspection. I'd made up my mind that I should probably buy one of them. I walked back, and they weren't at the table, and on down the aisle, they were on another table. The prices had been changed. So it's important to be able to identify, and that $3,500 is probably only half what it would bring now. That's about what it would bring when I made this tape, or this slide. Rarity, supply, and demand. Remember, rarity will win in the end based on demand once people figure out what the supply is. Supply and rarity, same thing about. Hamilton 992B. This watch represents the last pocket watch made in America by Hamilton. It has a serial number 523,867. That means they made 500,000 of them. Yet, it is the most desirable, most sought after, easily bought and sold watch in the United States because everybody understands exactly what it is. This watch was made from 1941 to 1969. The newest of all of our watches, but very desirable. Everyone has to have one. Has Railroad Associated name because it's Hamilton Railway Special. Railway. Any watch with Railway Associated name on it will bring more money than without it. This watch came in its own case with a marking inside and on the crown. The value of this watch will start about $35 for a parts watch to $350 for a new one in this condition to probably $700 or $800 for a new one in a gold case. So there's a wide range. You must consider everything. The condition of the dial, the condition of the movement, the condition of the case, and the originality of each of them. We're beginning to get sophisticated collectors, and all of this makes a difference. I bought this watch new from Hamilton myself, and here's the tag, and there's my initials in the upper left-hand corner. There's what I paid for it, $125. I bought it in about 1972 or 74 at Hamilton. Now, we'll deal with this a little bit. This is the top off of 18 hours of programs, so we cannot deal in depth with anything that we're going to talk about. But this represents the important factors out of 18 hours of full programs, which we'll have or will produce at some time. Here's a Mason Model 2 with 300 made. No one cares. Hardly anyone knows. Someone has to care, or it has no value. 23 Diamond, Ruby, and Sapphire, Illinois. Illinois is the answer to the Premier Maximus and Howard's Edward Howard. Everyone cares. This watch runs from $3,000 to $4,000 now. There was a number of them made, over 300, so it's not an impossible thing to find. The high-class dial, that's a part of it, must be on there. that dial's worth $300-400 on that watch. On a lesser grade watch, it's worth $50 to $100. So the point being, if you see the dial on a lesser watch, try to pick it up and save it till you get the right watch. A man here has a Freeport Watch Company dial, brand new one for sale today. What's a Freeport dial worth? It's worth $1,000 if you need it. It's worth perhaps $200 or $300 if you don't need it. The Priceless Possession of a Few is the name of a little book that came out with the 50th anniversary watch. And the title of a book written by Gene Fuller some years ago, and most of you have it in your library because it came out as a bulletin supplement. The watches contained in this Priceless Possessions of a Few are all very desirable, worth a good deal of money. This 50th anniversary, in its original box, which I'll show you, has at one time sold for as much as $3,500. One might bring $1,500 to $2,000 now, because we don't have the craziness going on that we had back during the gold rush. The watch is made from solid gold plates. The only way you could get this watch while they were marketing them was to have it given to you. You couldn't actually go to a store and buy it. The salesman would come into a town, select a group of people to present this watch to someone. The Premier Maximus, Waltham's prestige watch, made over 1,200 of them. For an uncased movement at about $3,500 to one with box and papers in mint condition, all original, probably $10,000 to $12,000. A wide variety in the value of these things depending on these factors. The nice movement, high grade, gold cups. Everything it takes to make a fine movement is incorporated in this watch. The dust cover saying Premier Maximus along with the matching serial number. The outside of the case. Nothing pretentious. Usually these fine watches were not pretentious. They were fairly plain and simple. The Edward Howard. Only 230 or so Edward Howards produced. Sold for $350, as did the Premier Maximus from around 1910 to till they ran out of them in the 20s somewhat. They were hard to sell. They were expensive. They were cost a lot to make. The Edward Howard is again box and papers and all probably $8,000 to $12,000. A movement, $3,500 perhaps. Everything has to be in place. It's very important. Here's the papers and the box for the Edward Howard. This happens to be number 190. I'm carrying number 73 in my pocket. Again, the box. The dust cover. The Lord Elgin. Elgin's had two entries into the prestige field. The 23-year-old Lord Elgin, a 16 size, the Lord Elgin in 12 size, and the C.H. Hulbert. Because these were not originally cased, and Elgin used the word Lord Elgin on other later watches, wristwatches and stuff, this watch does not command the price. It's around $1,800 to $2,800 depending on the way it's cased and who your buyer is. The C.H. Hulbert. These were uniquely cased watches. Every one was supposed to be different. These watches are all fairly scarce, and buyers are fairly scarce. But this watch in platinum or white gold should cost you from $500 to $1,000. You see the Elgin does not carry the punch that the Edward Howard or the Premier Maximus does. The front of the C.H. Hulbert. All I can do is give you some ideas. And if you really get interested in this, you're going to have to do some further study. There is no chance that I can present all of this where you can remember it. But it could mean literally hundreds and thousands of dollars to you when you're at an estate sale or wherever you happen to be and you're looking at watches. I looked in this box of apparent junk. And at a New England meeting one time, asked the guy what he wanted for it, and he said $200. Now those of you who are collectors and know watches can see a couple $100 laying there in one or two watches. You need to be able to know what you're looking at. The knowledge of the seller and his needs. Why is he selling? What does he know? Does he have enough nerve to ask you the price that it should be? Is he asking you twice as much as it should be? This one thing here affects the value of a watch at a sale probably as much as anything. A lot of people go around looking at people trying to figure out if they know as much as the guy that's selling whatever it is. One thing the seller has the advantage over you is he's had it longer than you have. He's at least had a chance, does he desire to find out what he's got and what the value is. If you can ask him a couple of questions and find out he don't know anything, everyone's got a little gambler in them, so they take a stab. I've got a few of those things in my boxes and on my shelves at home that I gambled and lost. And each of you in here, if you've ever bought anything, does also. Knowledge of the buyer and his desire. A collector, if he's done his homework, always knows more than the dealer who has it for sale. Some of you are going to mumble about that. But if a collector is a collector, he knows everything that there is available to know about what he collects. So he has the advantage over the fellow who's selling it. The only advantage the seller has is he can ask too much. Early makers, Pitkin, Custard, Goddard, etc. All of these that were made in the United States and not contract watches are very desirable and very expensive. The Pitkin, probably the most desirable of all. There was a buy order out for between $35,000 and $50,000 for an original one of these. This one's in the Smithsonian, owned by the Elgin Watch Company. There are a few in collections. A Goddard with the equal balance cock, the most desirable of all. In original case, runs from $5,000 to $10,000. These turn up, because Goddard made something like 600 or so, but only a few have the eagle balance cock, and they're in the later numbers. The front of the watch. I owned this watch one time. This case mark seems to be the correct one. That's sort of an eagle in an oval. Most all of this information has been published, one time or another. The English type case, perhaps some of the parts was made in England. We don't have to go into the details of this. It's history to most all of the watch collectors that are in here. Here's one without the eagle balance cock. It's worth less money, but important. A lower number, but in this case, worth less. J.D. Custer. Probably no more than 2 or 3 of these are known. This is number 2, and it's in the Smithsonian. I couldn't place a value on this. It's whatever I suppose somebody wanted to pay the guy that had it. This is the pattern watch made by the Marsh Brothers for Dennis and Howard Davis to start their factory about 1852. It's an 8-day watch after the English style with an European type dial, calendar and all, but they did not make this watch. They made a variation of the watch, which I will show you. This watch is also in the Smithsonian. The case, made by Durand. Another view of the case. And another view of the case. Another view of the case. In the 5th category, we have historical or milestone models. You know this is important in automobiles. It's important in a lot of things. Watch collectors have not gotten around to this point yet. The 1857 model, the 1868 model, the 1872 model. Most everything that Waltham did at one time or the other could be considered a milestone model. If a museum was to display only Waltham, they could represent the American watch industry pretty well. So look to Waltham for this category. This is a book written by the late George Townsend, which is was a groundbreaking effort. It's an absolute must for anyone who's going to collect watches. A world of information was in here. Till this little book come out, we were guessing. We're still guessing about a lot of things, but we guess less and less each day. Here's the 8-day Howard Davis and Dennison watch that was made off of the patent watch that I showed you earlier. This is #1 watch. It's in the Smithsonian. And either this, I don't know who could predict the value of this. You don't even need to try, but there are 18 of these watches made. 3 or 4 of them are in the hands of collectors. But who knows when you open a box of junk that one of these movements won't be in there. I would say you could ask whatever price you want to. You'll probably get it. A view of the dial and case. This is an 1852 or 53 watch. These engravings were made much later. We won't take time to try to read them. The outside of the 8-day watch. Warren number 29. This was the watch carried by Mr. Townsend, and in another collection now. Number 18 watch is in the possession of a man who was at this meeting, and it's probably the first machine-made watch with interchangeable parts, the number 18 watch. This is what's called the 57 model, although this watch is different than the 57 model. But they started making this watch in probably 53 or 54. This watch should cost you between $30,000 and $60,000 perhaps. They made almost 100 of them. It's not impossible to find one. A Samuel Curtis Roxbury, the 2nd model watch. This watch is the same as the Warren. They made almost 900 of this. The value begins to fall off now. We're down around $1,500 to $2,000. Roxbury Samuel Curtis. All of this information has been recorded, and it's there for you to find and to know. The Dennison Howard Davis, one that's been desirable for years. The value lies somewhere between $800 and perhaps $1,200, depending on how it's cased. This is a 57 model Waltham, probably made before 57. The 72 model that I gave you earlier and said that it was a milestone watch. They sell for very little. This is a 16 jewel version, and you can buy it on the floor for $50 or $60 without a case. The watch has got to be worth more in the future. It has to be once people understand what it is. Finest is the watch. I'll go back to it for a little bit. It's the watch that put the American watch companies, Waltham most of all, into the European market. They selected this watch from a group of watches under production, put it through tests and trials, and they won contests from around 74 through around 80, 82, all over the world with this watch. They beat the finest handmade watches made in Europe. This watch has to take on some importance. American Watch Company, we talked about this. The last statement is, what have you found in good Walthams lately? Someday, this will be one of the sentences that begins a conversation in a phone call or a meeting among watch collectors. Tracy Baker and Company. The ex-owner of this watch is in the audience tonight. He bought it right in front of me. Many of you have heard me tell this story for I'm not sure what, $85 to $100. You could buy 150 at least kitchen clocks with this watch if you had it. The original dial. He bought it at a mart such as this. And most of these things have been bought at marts such as we're holding here. Nashua, an important development. It's a long story in itself, but basically some guys broke away from Waltham, went up to Nashua, began to make watches, developed a couple of models, couldn't make a go of it. Waltham bought them back, brought them back down to Waltham and operated it as the Nashua department. And most of the succeeding models was based on the Nashua models. These names you will recognize. You see any of these names on a watch, except perhaps Vanderwert, you see Wert's patent, that appears most of all, makes the watch worth extra money. You need to do a little homework there. The Nashua Watch Company, Nashua, New Hampshire. This is the watch they developed. This is apparently number 4. They made a few and got them out with the Nashua name on them. Most was taken down to Waltham, renumbered, and both numbers are under the dial on these first 150, 200, 20 size Nashuas. The other one was the 20 size I just showed you. And the ones with the double numbers will bring $1,000 to $2,000. The 20 size without the double numbers is the $100 to $200 variety. So you see there's a little sophistication to watch collecting, the same as there is to clock collecting. The 68 model was Waltham's entry into the stem wine field. This is the first stem wine and stem set. The 1870 model was advertised as being for railroad service. This watch again is being overlooked. Not a whole lot of them were made. All railroad collectors are going to need one of these in their collection. They will not have a complete collection without this, should they want one. Remember, they've got to want one. We're back to the 72 model, 21 jewel, and there's a little sentence on there, words compensating balance. That's worth probably 500, that line on there, and it must have the balance. The balance has a sawtooth arrangement that you can identify on the balance wheel. The 72 model, without it, 21 jewel, is in a $500 to $1,000 range for just a movement now. This is, you're noticing American written out. American Watch Company, Waltham, Mass. When you see American written out, that's the highest grade of any model that Waltham produced. And in each of them, they only produced a few. Collectors desire them. They're not willing to pay much money because they know not many people have the information. They know that when they run upon one, they'll get it worth the money. So the price is still holding down. $500 to $1,000, we'll say. Lots of opportunities in that area. The Waltham Vanguard, the 92 model, developed strictly for railway service, came out obviously in 92 or 93. There's literally thousands of them with probably 50 varieties. If you wanted to just collect Waltham Vanguard or the 92 model, you could build just a collection with it. They would run from $45 to perhaps $2,000 of the varieties. Here's the 99 bridge model with, again, American Watch Company. Be careful about it, the American Watch Company being separated by the word Waltham. That don't count. If American Waltham Watch Company is not what we're talking about. We're talking about American Watch Company. At the time that Robbins bought the Waltham, or the Boston Watch Company, Howard took a few of the 57 model movements over to Roxbury and finished them up as Howards. There was quite a hassle over this. They're on the 6,000 serial numbers. This watch is worth more money. Normally a 57 model key wine's worth $35 to $50. The high grade ones and early numbers ones are vastly underpriced in my estimation. But what sets the price? Supply and demand. Nobody wants it, has no value. All those things will change in the next 10 years or so. A good thing to talk about here is collecting and setting your goals, developing you a budget, and looking 10 to 15 or 20 years ahead, what's going to be good in 10 years from now. Decide how much you want to spend each month or each week or whatever, whether it's $25 or $20,000 or $100,000. And there are people in those categories that are only buying the most rare and the most expensive. Here is another Howard and Rice. Another one that Howard and Rice took over and finished up. Here's something to watch out for. This is a fake. Howard and Rice, Boston, Mass. This thing came out of Florida. They milled off the plates, re-engraved it. It's just an old 57 model. They They could have eliminated the roughness of the engraving here, but they weren't sophisticated enough to do it at that time. You need to pay a little attention because you could be offered one of these. And instead of it being worth $1,000 or $1,200, it may only be worth $100 or $75. As always, the fakers will only pick on the expensive things. We have to talk about Howard a little bit because when they split up and Howard went over to Roxbury, he developed his own model. This is a Model 1 key wine. We're in the $1,000 to $1,500 range for a movement, a mint one. The Model 2, more scarce, but usually won't bring quite as much money as the Model 1. The Model 3 made a good many of these. There's a lot of these for sale out there. The value will run from $50 to $150, $200, depending on its condition. Howard watches are more or less one-of-a-kind watches. Parts do not usually interchange. If you're looking at a Howard watch and it doesn't have all the parts, don't pay much for it. You may never get it running, or you may pay a good deal of money to have parts made. Watch your step. Mr. Townsend, as you know, had a Howard book finished when he passed away. I bought the rights to it and published it. And most of you know about it. It's had a tremendous effect at the present time on the market. Howards do not stay on the tables now. They mostly disappear sometime during the meeting. But find out what you're doing. Early inventors, promoters, company officers. Any of these people had anything to do? J.C. Wolfley was the president of Peoria Watch Company. One of those changed hands at this meeting. Aaron L. Dennison. I'm going to show you the movement and then back up to the it's a regular Dennison Howard Davis, number 1009. Normally, without that dial, this watch is the $1,000, $1,200 watch. With the dial, it perhaps could bring as much as $25,000 to $50,000. At least it's insured for $50,000. How much is a dial worth? The Borenson model railroad standard, made by Charles D. Long for the McIntyre Watch Company, a prototype which was never put into production. D. Long is a magic name among watch collectors. It had a running center seconds, kind of in the style of some of the English watches. This is a dial for the watch made by O'Hare Dial Company, and it has ball numerals and configuration on it. They no doubt was going to try to sell ball on the idea of this watch and failed. It's fully signed. C.E. D. Long maker. I own this watch. I've been offered $10,000 for it. To give you some idea of what some of these things are worth. You clock collectors can begin to see that you can build a fabulous clock collection. You can pick up one of these watches. And of course, when the watch collectors find these watches and had rather have a whole bucket full of something else, they offer these things for sale. Famous owner, speaks for itself. Mark Twain, Theodore Roosevelt, the Shah of Iran, anyone. This happens to be, says, presented to Mr. Albert Berghaus as a recognition of his services on his late visit to England for my illustrated newspaper. September 1st, 1860, Frank Leslie. Leslie's Illustrated. This is kind of a borderline important watch because in order for a name to be important in a crowd of 10, they ought to be at least half recognize who the name is. I'm sure that not half of you knew who Frank Leslie was. So the importance of the name has a lot to do with the value of the watch. The original dial to the watch. The interior of the watch is a 59 model, and the very fine outside case. And the proper marking, Robbins and Appleton case. They were the owners of the company at the time, or at least the merchandisers at the time. For logical school watches, these are a category that many people find interesting and pay a good deal of money for. There are two names that are important. There are many others. Here's one by I believe it's N.G. Bayers, West Aurora, Illinois. I can't read the rest of it. The important thing is, he constructed this watch while he was going to school to be a watchmaker. And you will find some fine D10 escapement watches, some really dandy pieces. There's one in the pocket of a collector at the meeting here today. Here's another one from Rock Island. You'll find these, and most of the time they look like foreign watches. Seldom do they look like American watches. Identification, remember, the thing has no value till you identify it. Another one, made by Smith at the Canadian Horological Institute. This particular one's made from an Elgin Veritas. Probably will command more value than the other two that I've shown you. It's in the collection, very important collection at the present time. These things show up with fairly good regularity because where are these watches? The watches are in the families of the men who made them still. And when I was in Seattle the other day, I looked at two of them, made by the father of a man who's running a parts place up there. And they may never be for sale. This is the dedication that's inside that watch that I'm showing you. We need not take the time to read it, but this affects the value of the watch, and that's what we're talking about. Value is how we keep score on how collectible something is. Everything that's in the mart out there is collectible at one level or another. And that's how we keep scores. How many dollars do they want for it? Has no bearing on 5 years or 10 years from now. Your homework and your guess at the future is more important than what's out there and what they're asking for it now. I can tell you what happened yesterday, but I can't tell you what going to happen tomorrow. Precision watchmakers, Basso, Potter, Reed, and there are others. They're famous and important in Europe as well as here. So they have a double bunch of people looking for them. We start with a Reed. Reed worked with Howard, perhaps helped him develop his original models. Some of this is a matter of history and some of it is a matter of conjecture. These Reeds in original cases bring a good deal of money, especially around Boston where they were made. I know that this watch was priced to me at $15,000 2 years ago. I don't know if it sold. Potter. Very important maker. Very desirable. One thing you need to watch about some of these watches, one of the things that we use for price guides is the auction catalogs. Back when we had the gold fever running through the land, these watches brought a lot more money than they do now. So be careful what you're using for a price guide. Another Potter. Notice that Potter's initials are in the form of the plates, the AP. Not all of them, of course, have that, but a lot of them do. A Fassel. Research is underway now, of course, on Fassel and in Potter, and when we get the story as complete as we can get it, it will be published in the encyclopedia and perhaps articles in the bulletin. Everyone who's preparing research for me for the encyclopedia has been encouraged to prepare also it for the bulletin. Why? Because I'll probably never distribute more than 2,000 copies of the encyclopedia, and it'll go to 33,000 people, or how many members there is when it's published. I get limited distribution. The dial. Another Fassel. These movement chests used to bring $3,500 to $5,000 without a case. I don't know of any selling recently, so it's hard to predict. Another Fassel. Who made it? Very important. Who made it? Here's a Columbus. Columbus is not usually an expensive watch, but this one was made for J.P. Stevens. Only a couple of them have shown up. makes them worth a good deal more money than if a J.P. Stevens was not on there. It perhaps will be a $50, $75 watch without it, perhaps $300 to $500 with it. You see the difference a name makes. Stevens did not make it, Columbus did. Under contract. The Dudley. Everybody wants a Dudley watch. This is a Model 1, there's 3 models. The Model 1's the only one Dudley made. The rest of them were made by successors of Dudley. The Model 1 will be worth more money in the end. Now they all bring about the same. The H. Flint. Nothing is known about Flint, except as it says there, he operated in Cincinnati, Ohio. 3 or 4 of these that I'm aware of have turned up. They've all sold for more than $3,500. The second time, or third time. The first time they're bought for $50 or $75 or whatever a watch will bring. It's after it's identified properly and the proper buyer is found due to high prices. 26 jewel Benjamin Franklin. This was made for, I forget now, a company in Cincinnati, I think, under the brand name of Benjamin Franklin. This is a 26 jewel bun special. This watch will bring $6,500 to $8,500. Now, just a movement, no case. Rare, desirable, got all the good things going for it. Over 100 years. I've given some serial numbers there of watches that are over 100 years old. You go into an antique show and you look to see what's for sale. Most of it's not 100 years old. A lot of the watches are. You got a 100-year-old piece of glass, they ask you an arm and a leg. You got a 100-year-old watch, you probably buy it for $40. They may ask you $150, but you can sure buy them for $40 in the mart in here. You can buy 300-year-old watches, movements at least in here, for $40. Age don't necessarily count. It's important, but it's not one of the main criteria. Home Watch Company, a 57 model. Lowest grade that Walter made. They did not guarantee it to run. You can read it in their advertising. They say all grades are warranted except Home Watch Company. It did run though, ran well. Everybody would like to have a Home Watch Company. You can buy one cased in a nickel or silver case for $100 or so out there. It's underpriced, when based on a lot of other things that we know about. The thing that we are lacking, and the only way that you can build a club and sustain a club is through knowledge. The thing that we're lacking in the watch business is knowledge. The guy you're going to buy the watch from does not know what it is. I'm talking about outside these marts, and many of them that you're going to buy from people in the marts don't know what they have. And the same with clocks. We've got the moonshots and the sleepers in every meeting. You wonder why the clock collectors who know their beans, or corn, or whatever you want to call it, are running up and down the aisle while people are setting up to buy the things that people are setting out when they don't know what they have. They don't know the real value. Identification's what we're talking about. Low serial numbers. We can't deal too much with low serial numbers because it means different things in different companies. A low serial number in Illinois is worth more money than a low serial number in Elgin. A low serial number in Waltham is much higher than one in Elgin or Illinois. It would take a whole day to work that out. Movement quality, jewels finish. Gold jewel cups, gold train wheels. Train wheels, I mean the little wheels you can see in there. Patent regulator. Gold screws in the balance wheel. Highly damascened finish. Rounded corners on the wheel arms. All of these denotes a high-grade watch. As a matter of comparison, which is not a true comparison, a watchmaker goes in a shop, they hand him a hunk of iron or steel or nickel and say, go make a watch. If he makes a 7-jewel gilt, it takes him less time. If he makes a 23-jewel, a finely finished watch like this, it may take him 10, 20, or 100 times as long to make that watch. So these watches cost a lot more money. They cost more money when they were bought. They were more accurate timepieces and finer timepieces, therefore they sold less. And these are the ones that people want in their collection. Here's a nickel key wind Rockford. Not necessarily the highest grade in the watch, but not in the world, but a respectable watch and very rare. Most key winds, as you know, are gilt. The opposite happens to be true with this. This is a 7-jewel Hamilton Watch Company. These at one time would sell for $2,500. The supply has exceeded the demand, and it's fallen off to perhaps $1,000 or so. But still, for a 7-jewel watch, it's very hard to get $25 for a 7-jewel Elgin or Waltham. Hamilton is rare. So rare will win in the end. Okay, break there.
It says 18.
Dials are taking on more importance every day. Many collectors are specializing in dials. A lot of times the dial's worth much more than the watch itself or the case or anything else that it has. A little bit of terminology. Double sunk dial is 3-piece. Single sunk 2-piece. Depressed center porcelain dial at the top and a metal dial at the bottom, which can either have a sunk seconds bit or just flat. The most desirable is on the left, the double sunk 3-piece. This is normally on the railroad watches to help give clearance. An early hand-lettered American Watch Company dial. You can buy them out there by the handfuls for $5 or $3 if somebody's got them. Yet they're 125 or so years old. They're made 1850 to 1870. The decorated dials. This dial will bring by itself, not on a watch, $300 to $400. If it's got a hairline in it, it'll bring $100. If it's got 3 hairlines in it, you may not be able to sell it. Hairlines and damage is very, very important on these dials. I sold this dial for $600. It had never been on a watch. It's an 18 size Elgin. I sold this dial for $600. We drink from the same canteen. This was when the North and the South met at Gettysburg, I believe, on the first night. And there was only one spring. They both got water at the same place, peacefully. This dial, I think, is in the meeting here. You can ask him what he would want. I don't believe he'd take $1,000 for it. This one went through Sotheby's auction and brought $350 some 4 or 5 years ago. Thompson Company, Chicago, Berkshire Hills, Donald Weicheier is a note to myself to tell you a short story. Donald Weicheier tried to make porcelain dials, and he's in the Chicago chapter, and a lot of you know him. He was not successful. I'll show you one of his dials here. It looks good in the picture, and it was a decent dial. But he could not, he went into the Thompson Company where Elgin and other people had bought their clay to make these white dials, and they told him when he was in there that he couldn't do it. They didn't tell him why. 2 or 3 years and $15,000 or $20,000 later, he was back in there talking to them, and they said, "You still trying to make dials?" He said, "Yes," and they told him why, that he couldn't. That the clay deposit was in the Berkshire Hills in Vermont, and that it had long since played out. And then without that clay, that it would be probably impossible. You can make a white plate or something that is thick with the modern methods, but you can't make one thin enough to get it on a watch without it cracking and blowing up on you when you go to fire it. So far, the technology is not there. Here's one of Elgin's dials. The finest dials was made from 1890 to 1920. This is one of Elgin's dials. You can find no finer dial than these. And someday are going to take on importance, more so than now. Ferguson's dial was made by a man in Monroe Louisiana. A friend of mine was going to college down there and located some of Ferguson's dials that had never been sold. He sold them to me, and for a long time we had plenty of Ferguson dials at $30, $40, $50. Now they're $100 and more for a mint one. Railroad collectors would like to have one in their collection. There will never be enough to go around. Mint means a good deal. Montgomery's safety numerical dial, invented by Montgomery, who was the chief time inspector on the Santa Fe Railroad in Topeka. The numbers 1 to 60 denotes a Montgomery dial. At one time, he drawed a 25-cent royalty for every dial made by every dial company or every company in the United States. Anytime one was used on a watch, he got 25 cents, which was a good deal of money. Here is a patent applied for dial, which Montgomery either beat, I don't know. This was one of Walton's. It's rare. I don't know what happened here, but they only made a few. It never caught on. Montgomery ran them off. I don't know what happened. A hand-drawn, hand-painted dial from Canada. On the tinder you can see the word Dominion. There is a watch that goes with this called Dominion Railway. This dial will bring $300 to $400 by itself. Another one in black and white was CPR, Canadian Pacific Railway. No doubt these were made by O'Hare. O'Hare Dial Company made many, many dials that are worth a good deal of money. This is a paper dial on a dollar watch. This dollar watch is worth $250 to $350. This is Ingersoll, of course. Well, I can't get that one down. It's another dollar watch. Boxes, advertisements, papers, all add value to a watch and all are important. Anytime you guys buy out a jewelry store, don't throw away the papers until I get to look at them. Or Steve Berger, or Bernie Edwards, or some of the other collectors who collect paper and this kind of thing. Because sometimes the papers you get is worth more than the parts and the other stuff that you get. Case quality, metal decoration, etc. Has a very important role to play in the value of a watch. This little chart is from the encyclopedia, that you can use different multipliers and such and figure out about the value of your watch. And strangely enough, we worked on it so long that it works halfway decent. The 18-size multicolors with a diamond. During the gold fever, these were up as high as $6,000. Everyone should strive to get one. You don't have to pay $6,000. You only have to pay what the guy wants for it when you find it. The other side of the watch, or another watch. Exquisite pieces. Europeans never attempted this kind of a watch to amount to anything. This is an American watch, an American-made design. A gold case, chain, fob, and decorated dial. Couldn't ask for a better combination to carry in your Sunday suit. Make an attempt to get one. A lady's watch with rubies, diamonds, sapphires, or if you get one full of holes, put phonies in it. It'll still have the look to it. Maybe not the value, but the look. And you'll see these cases occasionally full of holes because all the stones have been taken out of them. An exquisite watch here, a foreign watch. It's a perpetual counter of the whole ball of wax. When I took this picture, a man had it in his front pocket. He sold it the next day for $100,000. It's been in some auctions. I don't think the value is that now, but those are diamonds, and it is 18 size, and there's a bunch of them, as you can see. The foreigners went more for this. Overall condition. Read the first sentence and apply it to clocks, or watches, or cut glass, automobiles. Apply it to anything. Condition, very, very important. The only time you can tolerate poor condition is in a rare watch. As you can see, all the watches in the world are not worth $10,000. But these have a value. They'll have more value in the future. They may never keep up with inflation. They may not keep up with the 10% you can get on your bank account either. But if you do your homework, some of these are going to be worth a lot more money than others, obviously. But again, if you're going to say take 10 years from now, it'll depend on what the collectors are looking for 10 years from now. This is just a little grading information. We will spend no time on it. It'll take too long. But you can see that a new case is worth 200% more than a mint one, maybe even more. I'm talking about a new old stock case. NOS, you'll see that written on tags occasionally. It means new old stock. Original case versus recase. We could spend all day on this one category. Never get it settled. Railroad watches, again. A category so broad and so deep, all I can tell you is, or will tell you at this point, is that railroad watches are worth more than non-railroad watches. They're the highest quality. We've got 5 periods or 6 periods to deal with. All I can do is tell you that these things exist. If you get interested enough, the information is out there for you to find. Basically, a railroad watch, at any given period of time, beginning in 1857 till the present, we'll say, was the highest grades, 16 size and 18 size, that any company was making if they were making railroad watches. Trenton and New York Standard, New England Watch Company did not make railroad watches. Most everybody else did. Most always they are marked adjusted, except the very early. They were either advertised to have been adjusted or was marked adjusted. And as the periods come forward, from 1870 forward, the restrictions or the qualifications got more stringent, and they had to be finer pieces. But the 30 seconds a week held from around 1880 until the present time. That's still the requirement. This we talk about period 6. Like I said, we can't deal with them. Railroad associated names, I have a program on railroad associated names that I'll give next weekend at Omaha, and I've given it a number of times. It takes a whole program to cover this. But any watch with any name on it, with the railroad associated, raises this watch from, say, $75 to $900. A big difference. This one, perhaps the same. You recognize these as 92 model Walthams. Pennsylvania Special, a magic name. Perhaps raises this watch from 100 to 125 to 800 to 1200 or so, depending on the buyers, etc. Another Railroad King. I'm giving you some examples. Canadian Railway Time Service. Made for Canadian Railway, and it was a grade within Waltham. There's plenty of them to go around. 250 to 300 catches these watches. Chief Inspector's Office, Baltimore and Maine Railroad. We think we know who had these made. Notice that the plate, Boston and Maine Railroad. Notice that that plate does not match the rest of the watch. Apparently he only had plates made, the barrel bridge I'm talking about, and put them on whatever he wanted to. This happens to be a railroad grade watch. I bought a watch with that Chief Inspector's name on a paper inside the cover, so we know who he is now. The Pennsylvania Railroad Company. There's 2 of these watches in the show. There was a time when they first began to show up that they might have brought as much as $2,000 or $2,500. Now perhaps the real value in this show is perhaps $800 to $1,000, maybe $1,100. It's only a dial. The movement doesn't say anything about it. It's B.W. Raymond, Elgin, Illinois. The original case had the engine number on the outside. Very few original cases survive. The Pennsylvania Railroad, this is a Waltham 57 model. The Sioux line, only one or two of these dials have turned up that I'm aware of. It's under the porcelain. Bernie Edwards, as you know, is here with his decals. Bernie Edwards does a fine job for collectors. But before you pay $300 for this dial, take out your pocket knife and see if you can scratch it off. Because if you can scratch it off, it doesn't have that value. Same applies here. We think Mace, the railroad inspector in Kansas City, had these made. He was an inspector for the Santa Fe. Only a few of them around. Collectors want them badly. Private label or jeweler's contract. Okay, I guess I got to go back to that. Private label or jeweler's contract. This means a mom and pop jewelry store or any jewelry store in the world or in the United States could contract with Illinois or Elgin or anyone to have watches made with their name and address on the watches. They have additional value, some not very much, some a lot more. And this is a whole area within itself. But keep in mind that watches with names other than the maker's names, some have a good deal of value, some have less. Railroad watch inspectors, the ones who have been verified, these contract watches, the ones who have been verified to be railroad watch inspectors, are taking on a good deal more value now. Once they've been identified and collectors agree and understand that that's what they were. It's a time and place in history. Here's one of them. A.K. Job, Jackson, Tennessee, and Water Valley, Mississippi had 2 stores. This is a 24 jewel bun special. Normally would bring from $300 to $400. At this time, it doesn't raise it all that much, $500 to $600, we'll say. The matching dial. W.L. King, Hinton, West Virginia. Another contract watch. Ball made over 110,000, or had made over 110,000 watches with his name on them. He made no watches himself. He contracted with Elgin, Waltham, Illinois, St. Thomas, Aurora, Elgin, I don't know how, 5 or 6 companies, and had watches made, most all of them say official railway standard. This one also has a jeweler's name, W.V. Foster, Tipton, Indiana. Now this watch without the jeweler's name would be about $150 without the case. With the jeweler's name, it's $600 to $1,000. So watch closely. You see, this is not a clear slide, but on the bottom line has that man's name, Tipton, Indiana. Makes this dial, rather than being worth $75, worth $300 to $350 at the present time. This is back in the jeweler's contract thing we talked about earlier. Washington Watch Company. Was a Montgomery Ward's trademark, Lafayette. Raises it from $400 to perhaps $1,200 to $1,500. Very desirable watch. Ariston, made for Marshall Field and Company in Chicago. Only one of these watches have turned up. The Tiffany of Chicago. It's a diamond, ruby, and sapphire grade. The watch has not been sold, so we can't predict what the value is. The owner is asking about $4,000 for it. They came in marked cases, the Ariston did. It's important they be in marked cases. R.W. Sears Watch Company, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Before Sears was Sears and Roebuck. Sears was a watch dealer first. These are being sought after by 2 or 3 collectors that know that they exist. Only perhaps less than a half a dozen have ever turned up. Perhaps he had no more than 25 watches made. On the jeweler's contract, they're all going to be rare. There's no doubt about it, they're going to be rare. Names of small towns. This again's with the jeweler's contract. A man from that town is interested if it has his town's name on it. If it happens to have his own last name on it. There's a lot of little things that work in to the desirability of these watches. Fred McIntyre. Fred McIntyre, South McAllister, Indian Territory. this takes on some extra meaning. Fred McIntyre was of the McIntyre Watch Company. He also had a jewelry store, obviously in South McAllister, and he was in Indian Territory. So there's Indian Territory collectors. You get all these things that come in, work in, to make these watches more desirable. Myrmid Jacquard, very familiar name to all of you from St. Louis. They're collected by people in St. Louis. They're collected by people everywhere. There's not a big demand, but it raises the value of the watches a little. As it spreads, perhaps it'll raise them more. You could probably get more varieties of Myrmid Jacquard, both in Swiss-made watches, Elgin, Hamilton. I just recently picked up a 1902 catalog that pictures probably 15 different varieties of Myrmid Jacquard marked watches. You can make a collection of Myrmid Jacquard, and it would be interesting. Henry D. Nell, Sandusky, Ohio. A railroad watch inspector, we believe. His name also appears on ball watches. Worth extra money. Western mining frontier towns and historical names. These have a nationwide appeal. These names make the watches worth a good deal more money. Raises a $35 to $50 movement to perhaps $400 or $500, or perhaps $300. Depends on who you're talking to. These things have a little area of iffiness. You've got to find that top buyer. Important people. We talked about this a little bit earlier. We need not spend any more time on it. English contract watches, made early, before the Americans started making watches. Here's Gahan Brown, Boston. A lot of people like to say he made that watch. Perhaps he did. Most collectors don't believe it. But they're in the $200 to $300 range if they're cased originally. They're in the $75 to $100 range if they have no case at the present time. Albert Pitts, Taunton, Massachusetts. Obviously an English watch of later design. English contract. Swiss contract. Probably the most important that you run into in the United States are the Patek Philippe contract watches that have the names with or without Patek Philippe of the most famous jewelry stores in the United States. They're probably the most important. They're some of the least expensive ones. Here's one made for Tiffany, a repeater, Swiss. Size, 18, 16 are most desirable. 12 is the least popular. 8 and 10 size if in gold, but a little too big for a woman to wear as jewelry. 0 and 6 size for jewelry, and if the cases are nice. Many people collect 0 and 6 size, just as a hedge against inflation or whatever the reason. I know of collectors who literally have safety deposit boxes of these watches. Original box timing certificates, we talked a little bit earlier about this. They are important to the watch. Now, an original box on a $50 watch can't be worth over $10 or $15. But an original box on a $10,000 watch can be worth $1,000. So the value depends on the importance of the watch that it's around or with. Here's the Dudley in the original box. This box has got to be worth $500 to $1,000 to a Dudley watch. With the original papers, and you can see it was made by P.W. Baker and Company, successors to the Dudley Watch Company. Model 2 this is. The box in the shape of a keystone from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The Howard watch license, Howard paper. Collectors like to have them in a box with the matching numbers because that's the way they sold them. It makes them worth more money. Pretty and running. This is where everybody starts. Never met a collector yet that didn't start collecting pretty hunting cases that were running. Once he begins to get a little knowledge, he starts to get embarrassed. Especially if he's paid a lot of money. Because this is the thing that you run into at the flea markets. And this is the thing they get a lot of money for. But you come into the marts here, you can buy them right and reasonable. Now, there is a point where these new 16, 18 size cases are new condition anything. They're collectible. Pretty and running has a value always to the non-collector as well as the collector. Always. This is what the whole world understands. Jewelry watches. We talked a little bit about this. The small watches. This is the last, next to last category. Beautiful multicolors. These are both 6-size watches. A little too big to wear around your neck now, but lots of people wear them because they can't get a smaller one or don't have a smaller one. The 28, one and last one. Complications and attachments. Americans didn't do much of that. Not much chronograph, not much repeater, not much calendar. They did a little. Waltham, of course, the most famous of all. They still don't bring a lot. The repeaters do. You need to do your homework in this area. There's Manhattans that make stopwatches. New York Standard makes stopwatches. Not particularly desirable. Waltham 5-minute repeater, or 1-minute repeater, I believe this was. The 1-minute repeaters, I think they made 5 of. They get up into $25,000 and above price range. Rare, high grade, maybe the epitome, maybe. Depends on your viewpoint of what you should collect. Another Waltham. That's the end of the slide presentation. Give me a second to get some lights, and the ones who want... I did it in Sandusky. It's a long program. Has an awful lot of information in it. Tells you lots of places to get information. And those of you who become interested can surely better your collection by using or pursuing the information that's presented there. Thank you.
Can you recommend a good basic catalog or book on pocket watches? Neophyte watch collector could.
Well, there are a number on the market. I've written some and have some. He has one of Schugert's book here. You should know and understand them before you start out buying based on them. You've got to take into consideration when they were written, what the situation was at the time. You know, this encyclopedia, if you start with me now, if you buy this book, and start with me now and read this and understand it, there'll be 4 or 5 volumes of this. When I'm finished, it will have the information that everyone in the United States knows that will contribute to the book. There will be no more complete information anywhere in one place. There will be other information, obviously, because we probably will not get it all in here. But this contains everything that is known at the present time. The problem with it now is that this one only contains these companies. And it'll probably be a 2-year period before they're all issued. My old red, white, and blue book, number 2, when someone comes up and says, if I'm going to start, where would I start? So I point to that book. Yet, those 28 things that I just gave you the program on will do you more good than probably much of the other stuff that you will. Also, you need a hands-on situation. You're not going to be able to learn from reading. You're going to have to buy some things. If you can afford to run risk, you can buy anything you want to. If not, then find a dealer you can trust who will not charge you more than what stuff is worth. There are dealers that you can trust. You'll have to ask around. Their reputations follow them rather closely, and you'll find out real quick. Those dealers, some dealers even give guaranteed buybacks, you know, to beginners, not to dealers and other collectors who are old established, so that, you know, you have a little confidence in what you're doing. But you're going to have to get some watches and go out there and open as many of them as you want to and try to learn. But it's such a broad field, you should narrow yourself down. Collect something you like to start with. You know, if something appeals to you here, then go that route. Anyone else?
On those, some of these engraved watches that were presentation watches, I think I saw one where Jack Dempsey had presented a watch to someone sometime that's engraved in the case. But any engraver could engrave something like that on there, so you'd have to...
You need a history.
Mm-hmm.
You need a history. You can trace. Yeah, right. You can take it and have anything engraved in it you want to.
Usually, by the serial number of the watch, you can date it.
Yeah. The serial number will help you.
Mm-hmm.
On the along the lines of serial numbers, Hamilton, it seemed like started putting, or maybe they always did, but some of their watches seems like have a C in front of the serial number.
Those are the late ones.
Okay. Now, did their serial numbers start over at the
Yeah.
C?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
They started over. In my Hamilton book, you can go by the table and look in it, and you'll see at the end, long in the 30s or so, they started doing that.
Are those C numbers identified by years, or are they just classified from 1 year to the 69?
Well, I haven't identified them by years because they're so late, it's not important as to age. But you could pretty well figure out, because in the book it says when they started making them and when they quit, and if you just divided those years, you know, you could prorate out about when. Thank you.
Thank you.
These are the watches that I collect. Now what I'm going to try to do this morning is to improve each of you's collection through the use of this information that I'm going to give you, which is not on what you collect. But what I'm going to show you is some very valuable pieces that are available here and in every small town throughout the United States. Rare in pocket watches is not unique. Rare in pocket watches is the rule rather than the exception. Now with watches, you have to move a little faster than you do with clocks. And you can take more time with a clock to identify it. But with watches, you need to know instantly. Or it may be a month or a year's wages you just left on the table. These are not brags, these are the truth. And I'll show you here in a minute. Now, three things that's got to happen. The first thing you think of, no matter what anyone tells you, unless I'm really unique, is that when I look at something on the table or I look at it at an antique show, a clock or a watch, first thing that comes to my mind, I wonder what that thing's worth. Not where it was made or when it was made or who made it, but I wonder what that thing's worth, because that's the thing you got to deal with right on the spot. He wants $75. Do I want to give $75? Will someone else get me out? So you got to deal with identification. If you can't identify what you have or what you're looking at, you can't deal with it. You can gamble on it, which a lot of us do, and I've got a lot of those things in my house and in my drawers and in boxes that I've gambled on and lost. Because no one will get me out. Few of us will take a loss on anything. That's just our nature. So, to complete the cycle, you've got to find it, identify it, and if you buy it, at that point you're the collector. If you've paid too much, you probably remain the collector. Right? You see, now you folks did the right thing here. You let in young folks free, but you still didn't have any. Just a few. If you look around at yourselves and all the people that's in that mark, we're all old. Getting older. No one to sell our mistakes to. No beginners. Think about it. After this meeting, there's a lot of you going to think about it. One of the things that didn't happen at this meeting that has to be to make a successful regional is you've got to have out-of-town buyers. You've got to have people come from out of town. You see, the dealers come and replenish their stock. They bring stuff to sell to you that they can't sell, and they come to get stuff from you that they can sell in their hometown. So that's what these regionals actually are for. Get acquainted, get information, all of the things that you know about. But the mark is an exchange of things that you can't get rid of. And it really doesn't amount to any more than that. Now, first you identify it, you're the collector. Now, if you're going to make any money on it, you got to find a buyer. That's hard sometimes. Or even just to get out of it, you got to find a buyer. We've talked about this, you know, hours and days, literally, about what the value of something is. Right now, out there in the market, we've been working on a fringe section for Clockwork 3. There's something interesting I'd like to tell you, too. All of these books that you've put out, that I've put out, I know you don't want to hear this and you don't believe it, but I've lost money on them. Now we think we've come up with a way to continue it, but if this last go-round doesn't work, I'm not going to produce anymore. It's going to be left up to someone else. We're selling advertising in Clockwork 3, and we've sold about $4,500 worth of advertising in Clockwork 3. That will pay for the printing of it. You don't, it's too long to make you understand the structure of what it costs to do them and what the dealer discounts is and all of that. But when the finally said and done, we've been in the red. Those of you who take my newsletter, and there's a few of you in here, I've explained all this to you. Okay, how am I going to help your collection? I'm going to show you a lot of things that's worth a lot of money. And tell you where to get the information to back up what I've told you, and tell you where the buyers are. And there will be one or two people in this room here that this will mean $1,000 or more to this program will. And maybe in the next 10 years or 15 years it may mean that to all of you. The only way it can fail to mean that to you is that you just aren't in the area of where things turn up. Now, you can see Red's videotaping there. We're going to have to take all this front part out. But we're preparing this to send to the association to see if they want to do videotapes. So we'll put the front end on this tape later on so that it will apply. Also, these tapes are going to be available from us. We've got about 3 done now, and Red don't give out on me. We're going to do more. And I don't know whether many of you know who Red is there. Red is the man who writes all the writing that's in my clock books, writes all the articles. I just assemble the stuff and we work on the prices. And Red puts all that good stuff in there. And this Clockwork 3, you'll really like it if you fool with veneer. He's got a terrific article. Also, the Kroger book here. He did the research for the 4 pages there. Okay, I'm going to mailing. Do the lights. I'm going to move this over there. Probably. What do you think, Red?
Either way, doesn't affect.
Okay, we'll leave it off then because they don't need to see anything but the picture. Now, if you got to go to the bathroom or whatever you got to do, just get up and go. It isn't going to bother me because I'm not going to be looking your way. The program's on railroad associated names. That means a name on a watch that's associated with the railroad. This is Chesapeake and Ohio Railway Special. You can read it easily. That watch normally would be a $75 watch. With that name on it, it's about a $1,200 to $1,500 watch. It makes a gigantic difference. Now, some of this stuff I'll repeat. And for those of you who don't know a balanced staff from a winding stem, you're going to have trouble understanding some of the things that I say. But the main thing is, it's like going to college, is that you find out where you can get the information. W.L. Freddie King in Hinton, West Virginia probably ordered no more than 25 of these back when he was having them made, so they're rare. Any watch with a jeweler's name on it is probably rare. Rare don't count if you don't have somebody wants to buy it. You can have the rarest clock or watch or anything else in the world, and if nobody wants it, it has no value. Remember I said the third thing was to find a buyer. But railroads has a lot of romance about them, and almost everything is collected up even to short sections of rail. Cars, what have you. And railroad watches has a unique position. The railroads could not have existed without the railroad pocket watch. It was absolutely as important to the railroads as was the air brake. They could not have operated without them. So they have a distinct place in history, along with a lot of other things that we'll discuss here. Here's L.H. Wallace Spatial Railway with a matching dial. This happens to be an 18-size Rockford. It says L.H. Wallace Railway Spatial, Ogden, Utah. This is the only one of this particular one that's ever turned up. I have it in my collection and would not sell it for $1,500. Pennsylvania Spatial, the most sought after of all, 26 jewel 18-size bone special. This watch changed hands not long ago at $7,500. There are more expensive ones, up to $20,000 so far, which I will show you. And you say, well, I'd never find one. That's not so. You may not if you're not looking, but if you do look, most any of this could be there. Pennsylvania Special. This is the dial for the watch I just showed you. About the first advertisement that appeared was in 1870. In the lower left-hand corner, it says the new plate watch, railroad timekeeper. Waltham advertised this watch, the 1870 model. Key winding, key set from the back, but it has nothing on it about railroads. But this is the first time that railroads began to creep into the advertising. Hamden realized the importance of the word railway early as 1878. This watch is not that early. They were first in Springfield, Mass., as you watch collectors know. And the early railways are sought after by collectors. Now this is a grade. Now we're going to deal with three different types of railroad associated. One is a grade that a factory made and anyone could order one. The others are the special order watches that was ordered by the local mom and pop jewelry store, the railroad inspector, whatever you want to call them. These grades are plentiful. Now they made railway, they made new railway, and they made special railway. And they made them from the 15 jewel to the 23 jewel over a long period of time. These watches are very easy to get and fall right into the regular category of $75 to $300 in the value range. You'll have no problem finding these. Here's an ad that Waltham put in August 1895, and somewhere on there they say they had at this time produced 3 million railroad watches. And all you can see up there is the 83 models. Now you collectors, you people who are just starting in here, know that these doesn't have any value out there on the mart tables. You can buy them for $35 to $50. I saw one real nice Crescent Street fellow was asking a little bit more money for them, but right now nobody's paying any attention to them. It may be a long time before anyone does, and you should set your budget and set your goals if you're looking for value appreciation. If you're not, you don't really have to pay any attention to what I'm talking about unless you collect something other than these and you would like to take the extra money you can earn and use it for that. Here's Railroader. This appeared in Waltham's grade list, but with a production of only 50. So you see that watch is rare, and that's a 92 model, and it normally would sell, it's also made from an Appleton Tracy grade, normally would sell from $75 to $100. But the word Railroader up there makes the watch bring $1,000. The matching dial that goes with it. A little bit on condition. Condition is almost everything in watches or clocks or anything else that you have a choice to choose from. In rare and old and unique, bad condition can be tolerated. Rough watches and clocks are easy to buy and almost impossible to sell. So when I give you these values are values that they have recently brought, or I know that I could sell one if I got one. They're only timely for this particular date. And for the people who's going to be looking at this tape for years to come, we'll state the date now that it's June, what day is it? 21st?
Right.
22nd, 1983. June 22nd, 1983. May? May. Got to do a lot of editing here, Ed. Here's an early Illinois watch. 4 of these turned up. Mailing sitting in the corner back there owns one. I own one. People who've done their homework in the years past have these watches in their collections. Those who are hearing about it for the first time didn't even know they existed. But up until now, they've been fairly easy. I've been given this program now for a year, and I've given it 5 or 6 times, and there's people in here who have seen this program before, but they keep coming back for more. Anyway, they're going to get more and more difficult. They are all rare except the ones that are grades. They're the best thing you can collect if you're going to collect railroad watches. This one isn't even railroad grade. It's 11 jewel. They simply put the name on it in order to sell it. Now, the ones that are not railroad grade won't attain the high numbers that the others will, because railroad grade has more meaning to it than the ones that are not. Here's a page out of the 79 indicator that lists 9 of them. It's too small to read, but you'll see examples of these watches as we go on. Here's one that was made for the Canadian Railway Time Service up in Canada. It was a grade, and still the watch is in the $200 to $300 price range at this point. And everyone wants one that collects this type of watch. Right now, to give you an idea of how many collectors there are in the United States, there's perhaps 6 that will pay the numbers that I'm giving you. So remember, the third part of the transaction was to find it, to buy it, and find the buyer. So I'm going to give you the names of the buyers at the present time. If they don't mind, they'd love for you to call them and tell them, I've got this thing I want to sell. It's Art Zimmerlaw in California, Lester Donnell in Indiana, Bill Magers in California, myself and Larry in Kansas City, the fellow in Huntington, West Virginia. I can never remember his name. Anyways, in Huntington, West Virginia. There are some other spotty ones that will collect specific things. And all railroad collectors have 1 or 2 or 3. But when you were talking about 6 collectors, Walter Craker up in Canada, another one. 5 or 6 collectors, can you imagine what will happen if it doubles and we get 12 collectors? See, most people that look at the world as it's full of everything. It's really not when it comes to collecting. Kroger collectors, for instance, I have a new book on Kroger. I didn't run into anyone in this meeting except one man that even knows what a Kroger clock is, hardly, and he happened to own 2 porcelain clocks. Kroger is a wide open field for anyone who wants to take off after them. Canadian Pacific, another one of the Canadian watches. Again, a grade, not worth a whole lot of money. Now, I keep referring to money because the dollar sign's how we keep track of how collectible something is. The Mart Room is full of all kinds of collectible things out there, running from a low of $5 to in thousands of dollars. Well, that's how we keep score, is how much they are. And there's no way that I can tell you in a meaningful way how you can deal with these once you find them without giving you some idea of their present value. These small ones of the 2 that I just showed you are more scarce than these are 16 size and the others are 18 size. Ball was probably the most prolific producer, yet he made no watches. He contracted with other watch companies to make his watches. Around 130,000 watches he had made. Now, there are rarer Ball watches, up to $5,000, perhaps $10,000 watches. This particular one I'm showing you is single roller. It's fairly unique, not many of them. It'll run around $300. Most Ball watches of the 17 to 21 jewel variety will run you from $75 to $150. The 23 jewels are over $600. And the 18 size 23 jewel is $5,000. One of Ball's trademarks in the center of that dial on a nice double sunk Montgomery dial. Railroad Watch Company was one of Ball's names, a rare watch, and in the $900 to $1,000. You're wondering, but now why does he keep saying $900 to $1,000? Well, we all have a choking level. Some of us choke off at 75, some at 100, some at 500, some at 1,000, some at 10,000. I can tell you a lot of them choke off when it gets over $1,000. So a lot of them have crept up around $1,000, and that's where they are. Has no bearing on what their actual value is going to be, but we can't really depend on that. We got to deal with the present. A very bad condition dial, it goes with that watch, but it's much better than any reproduction that you could put on it. A collector had much rather have this. Also, that hand with a hole in it is an original hand. This watch is unique in that it's the only one that's turned up. It's a 16 size Howard. It was for sale at the Florida Regional for $10,000. It didn't sell, but it might sell. Anyway, I'm sure that it would have sold for $6,000 or $8,000 easily, and I think it would have sold for $10,000 if the guy that wanted it hadn't been so hard-headed. But that hard-headedness runs pretty strong in us collectors. And again, the unique dial. This is also a rare ball watch, an Aurora. As far as I know, this is the only one of these turned up. It's in the West Coast collection, and you can't place a value on it. Here's the situation with Howard. This is a Howard. And if you can see right on the edge of the balance cock, there's the word adjusted written on the bevel that's near the case. And I'm going to walk up here because it's important. See the word adjusted written here upside down? And then right here on the balance cock side that faces the edge of the case, there's two initials, RR. All of these watches that have shown up have a ball dial on them and no other ball markings. So it's believed by researchers now that these are ball watches. And instead of the movement being worth $150 or $200, it's probably worth $500 or $600 or $700. No one's really put one on the market to test yet what they would bring. But you should take all those Howard movements that you see laying around. There were a few in here, and I looked at all of them. I didn't find any. But if I had of, you see the difference in the value and what these little bits of information will do for you. Here's an imitation. We call it an imitation ball watch put out by Hamilton. Ball at one time was a vice president of Hamilton. He was also what they call the Western distributor. Now Ball was in Cleveland and he was the Western distributor. You guys you wasn't in the picture then. Anyway, only 2 or 3 of these have shown up and they're up around the $1,500 area. The nice, beautiful dial, an exact imitation of what Ball was doing. Or we could say Ball maybe imitated them. Santa Fe route. These are important to us in this part of the country because that's Montgomery out of Topeka. He was the time service. He ran the time service for the Santa Fe, and he had Waltham make these watches. Now these are shown on Waltham's list as a grade, and there's quite a few of them. But instead of it being a $35 to $50 watch, it's a $300 watch. So see what these little bits of information that's written on these plates and on the dials, how much difference it makes in the way a collector looks at them? It's very, very important. Another style of Santa Fe route and the marked dial. If you don't have both the dial and the movement, you've got, as collectors, considered half a watch. If the watch is worth $400, then two is for the dial and 2 is for the movement. It usually don't go that way when the actual trade is made, because it's pretty easy to sell the watch with a Waltham dial on it, we'll say for $300. But when the guy really gets down to the nitty-gritty and he finds out what he's got, see, we've got a lot of people out there buying stuff right now, and always will have, don't know exactly what they're doing. So it should be half, but at this point in time it's not, may never be. Another one of Montgomery styles. This dial in mint condition usually bring $200 to $300 just for the dial, no watch. It can be on any watch, this dial apparently, but needs to be railroad grade. The Santa Fe Special that we're all familiar with, Hank Williamson told me at this meeting that this Santa Fe Special was marketed by Montgomery's brother through mail order. And they had Illinois make them, and they were marked on the movement and on the dial and on the case. And a mint one of these will bring you around $250. So see, not all things with railroad associated names are worth a lot of money. So you've got to do a little bit of homework to know exactly. If you've got time, you can run home and look at your books, and if you don't have time, the next guy that comes by is going to get it, probably, if it's underpriced. The railroad symbol, the Santa Fe symbol on the back of the case, if that case was mint, which this one's not, was half wore out, you probably could get $300 for that case with that on it. Now, one thing I've got to tell you at this point, well, we're not up to it yet. The Burlington Special was a Chicago mail order company made by Illinois. Movement, dial, and case was marked, and the Santa Fe was marked this way. You see it says the Burlington Watch Company, and so on. And collectors know this, and if you don't have all three pieces, the movement, dial, and case, you're not going to get the prices that I'm talking about here. These prices I'm talking about are for real. They're not pie in the sky, they're not guesses, they're not anything else. These are real prices that I'm giving you. If you don't believe it, get one of them and call me, and you'll believe it. H.E. Adams Railway Standard. Elgin, this is on an Elgin, and Elgin didn't do much of this. This happens to be from Sanford, Florida, on the southern line, probably. Elgins are not popular like Illinois and Hamilton. They're the two most popular of the railroad associated. B&O Railroad's Railway Special. I can tell you stories about almost all of these watches because the people who have them for sale do not have books. I just showed you that they don't have books in this room here. And when you go outside this room, there are no books. No one has the information. So if you walk up on these things, you get them for nothing, or he may think he's asking you for prices, and he's still asking you nothing for them. This watch is worth probably $1,200 to $1,500 also. It was ordered out by W.L. Jones and Company of Martinsburg, West Virginia. Now, I've given you two railroad inspectors, and the railroad inspectors' names by themselves, when they appear on a watch, make them bring more money. We need to start, and we will one of these days, a campaign to document all of the jewelers in the United States that was railroad inspectors. As we document those with authentic documentation, all of the watches that their names appear on are going to be more desirable to collectors. Now, I was shown a number of names, and I take a picture of every named watch that I find and a mark that I don't have any record of. It don't tell me anything other than that they were there on this certain date, not how they operated their business or what they did. But once we know that they were there, we can write to the Chamber of Commerce or whatever, or people who live in the areas, can get the information, and we'll do that someday. Here's Wayfield's Railway Watch out of Chicago. They had a big outfit in Chicago, and you find a good number of Wayfield watches. And again, a marked dial. Wayfield must have been a pretty proud company because their stuff only appears on very high-grade watches. They didn't use any of the lower grades. I've got a little section on some Hamdens here. Hamdens are not as popular, like I told you, as Illinois and Hamilton. And these usually run from $600 to $900 somewhere in there. This is the Frisco Special. It's important, more important in Paris, Texas than anywhere else probably. The thing is, we don't have a collector in Paris, Texas right now. So I still own that watch. I'm probably going to show you $500,000 worth of watches in this program, and you're going to think, well, they're easy to find. They're not easy, but they are there where you run onto them. Here's Katie Special, another Hamden, and a decorated dial. A lot of collectors will tell you, well, decorated dials wasn't allowed on the railroad. I guarantee you they were allowed on the railroad when these watches were made, because they were made from 1878 till about 1910. And the regulations that we collect railroad watches by didn't even come into effect until after 1905. So everything, the definition for a railroad watch could be 16 and 18 size watch of the highest grades that the companies produced, either marked adjusted or advertised as being adjusted. Didn't make any difference whether they were hunting or open face or lever set or pendant set, until they began to develop the rules that said they had to be before they could go into time service. Here's a Rio Grande Standard. And the dial. Here we got Roman numerals. Well, in the later years, they would never have taken Roman numerals, but they did when this watch was made. The Caulfield watch for railway service, and Aurora. Auroras are scarce. Auroras are scarce, period. And one with railroad service watch is even more scarce. So are buyers. You're not going to find many buyers for them. So everything has to be worked together. Old Colony. You really got to know your corn to recognize that as being a railroad associated name, because that railroad's not been in business for years, but it ran out of Boston, north to Taunton and some places like that. And here's the jeweler that had it made. Well, it takes, like I said, a pretty sophisticated collector to recognize that. So far, no one's recognized that I still have it. A.N. Anderson, a documented railroad inspector. He's from Minneapolis, isn't he? Minneapolis, Minnesota. A.M. Anderson. They come on 947s. You know, they are on, he had expensive watches made also. A boy here yesterday asked me for Wilson Brothers. He's in the audience here today. For Wilson Brothers. These are pretty hard to get. These were out of Boston. This one happens to say King of the Road, Wilson Brothers, Boston, Mass. Another page out of the 79 indicator. The 79 indicator has the most of these in them. I'll tell you a little bit about how my books were produced. I started in 1968 or 69 in gathering material. And I printed it as I learned it, or as I ran onto it, or as I photographed it, or as someone told me about it. So as I gathered this information, we started with number 2, we did an indicator each year, and all of those are different. That stack of books is a foot high. But you leave something laying on a table somewhere that book says it's worth $1,000 or $2,000, you buy lots of books. J.H. Lason Company, Salt Lake City, another important name. Tell you a little story about this watch. Not this watch, but the exact duplicate of it. Not long ago, Seattle had a regional. I went up there. We went downtown that morning to see what we could find, and it was just pouring rain and blowing, and so my buddies, my boy Larry and Miles Sandler and Bob Coonfield, they got wet, and they said, take me back to the motel. I don't want no more of this. So I go back, and Tom Fowler's in my room. And I said, Tom, I'm going downtown to try to find some watches. He says, in this storm? I said, well, Tom, I don't have anything else to do. Maybe it'll quit time we get down there. So we get in the little rented car we had, starts out of the parking lot. Man, it's rain's just coming in sheets. He says, I'm going to get out. I'm not going down there. I said, okay, Tom, get out. Oh, he says, I don't have anything to do. I'll go with you. So on the way down, we discussed how we're going to treat what we find. So we decide that whatever we buy, we'll both pay for it, and we'll split it up when we start home. We may not find them. We may not have them to split up. But we found this watch right here. We found it for $35, the best of all part, because it was just a welcome to this man who sold parts. We got into his parts drawers, and that's the best place to look. You all know that. We got into his parts drawers, and there that watch was. Second one that ever showed up. On the way home, way back to the motel, I gave Tom Fowler 5 $100 bills for riding down there with me in the rain. That's exactly what happened. Now the watch will bring $2,500. I wasn't complaining. This just happened. It happens almost every day. Here's a different kind of thing. This is a fun special, but it doesn't have any markings on it other than made expressly for Adolph Michael. Now, since it doesn't have a railroad associated name on it, it don't command the price. But this normally would be a $150 watch, and with that name on it, it might be a $300 or $400 watch. It has a nice dial, one of the finest dials that you could ever find. So, no doubt this man was a railroad inspector in Green Bay. So, somebody up around Green Bay, some of you that are listening in here can start this on yourself and try to find out who your railroad inspector was. Look for it, and then when you offer that thing for sale, say he was a railroad inspector, and be able to back it up. This dial on an up-down indicator, only a couple of them showed up. I know this dial has sold for $600. Because see, it says watch inspector right on it. Now you're wondering why we screw the backs off all your watches and you folks that has been exposed to this for the first time, you know why we come through and screw the backs off all your watches that's in your case. Because we know you don't know what's in there. We think we know you don't know what's in there. Sometimes you don't. CPR is this is a hand-drawn black and white dial fired by O'Hare, and that CPR is Canadian Pacific Railway. Only 2 or 3 of these have shown up, and they're in the $300 to $400 range just for the dial. It also comes in color with Dominion, and there is a movement that matches Dominion. There's been a half a dozen of these showed up, and yet that's a nice piece. It's not just black and white and some numbers. How tired do you get looking at your clocks and watches when you just look in there and they're just numbers and 2 hands, 3 hands, or whatever it has on it? These things makes, you know, you can keep a non-collector's interest for probably 45 seconds with your collection if you've got a couple colored dials in it. He loses interest after 10 or 15 seconds. You've all experienced that in trying to show somebody who don't care. So this will help prolong his interest. Only one of these dials has shown up, Sioux Line. Now, you all know that Bernie Ehrhardt makes decals, and you can stick them on dials. If they're not under the porcelain, don't pay no money. And get your pocket knife out whenever you're checking these watches, and if you can scratch it off, why, it's not real. You may have a little trouble with that, but before you put your money on the line, I'd advise you to scratch it off. Another Mobile in Ohio in the same category. Burlington route, same thing. Very rare. Everything I'm showing you is rare. This only comes with a dial. There's no movement to match this as far as I know. Again, rare things. These are Ferguson's, made in Monroe, Louisiana. Fred Andrus was down there going to college to get his degree in business, and he got wind of it. Somehow or another I turned up an ad, and I said, Ferguson was in Monroe. Why don't you try to find out where he was and what happened to him? Fred went and located Ferguson's family, and they had a whole bunch of these that had never been sold. Fred got a hold of them, and something's going wrong with their smell, so I'll get back further. Fred got a hold of them and sold them to me for like $10 a piece, and I was selling them for 20 and 30 and thought I was doing great things, and you can't even get one for 100. That power dial on the left, you probably pay 300 or 400 if the guy that's got it knows what he's got. You don't find them on watches much because they weren't accepted, but every collector wants one. Here's a watch they only made like 10 of, and I know that it sold for $1,200. We probably won't ever have to deal with another sale because they're scarce. This is an O size. Obviously wasn't used for railroad, but that little movement will only be worth $10 to $20. But with that name on it, it'll bring 100. See the difference that this little bit of writing makes. These initials are on that O size, and this stands for J.M. Roberts Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've been able to identify that. And we think he probably was the watch inspector. Now, it's obvious that this watch is a railroad watch. It's got a train on the dial. It's got a train on the movement. And it's got a train on the case. No doubt that that's a railroad watch. But it's not. It is a New York standard, though. It's not Swiss. I heard someone say Swiss fake. It's not. Both Seth Thomas and New York Standard made these watches. One of these days, collectors are going to want these. You can get them for absolutely nothing. If you didn't do nothing but bought these things, you'd do well in the future. Collectors like these, with the Union Pacific logo on the back of the case, or any engraving that's original. Now, it's going to occur to you that, well, I could take one of these down and have it done right now. You could do that. You ought to keep your eyes open when you're buying these. I have a number of new ones that I had a boy over in Indiana do for me. And I've got some rather unique ones because I drew up my own design. So you need to keep your eyes open when you're buying these and have some sort of provenance with them. Again, another one. This is from Parsons, Kansas. These are obvious original. Now, I used to have one in here, one of mine. Somehow or another I got it out. Here's a hand-engraved engine. Not all that great in this picture. But on that case, it's really nice. And a boy over in Des Moines has this case. And a magnetic shield. This is Giles. You can see a G in the middle. At one time, electricity and magnetism was a tremendously against a watch keeping good time. And a lot of these magnetic shields you see in these cases, they're just thrown from one place to another. No one pays any attention to them. But when enough collectors get knowledge and realize their importance, these cases are going to take on extra value. So you can't get nothing for them now, so just put it back in the drawer if you can afford to. Now here's another instance of Brown and Grant Special, Saginaw, Michigan. Nothing is said about railroad. The only thing interesting here is the word special and the fact they're from Saginaw. But you'll find extra and special on them, and they'll raise the value a little bit, but nothing like a Railroad Association name. Rather than that being a $75 or $100 watch, it might be a $150 watch. Again, definitely a railroad watch. Says so right on it. Engine special. Number 9, 2. Now here's a real one. This is a Rockford, Railway King. That other one was a Swiss fake. This dial here in Rockfords are very, very rare. Buyers are kind of scarce. Here's Railroad Timekeeper, Elgin. Almost everyone in here that knows anything about watches would say at this point that's an Elgin. It's not an Elgin, it's a fake. You don't have to deal a whole lot with fakes. They all have this Swiss-looking finish to them, this kind of dull, silvery, goldish look to them. They had a different way of gilding their movements than we did. And after you've looked at a few of these, you'll have no trouble in detecting them. There's a nice little story with this, and I think I should tell you about it, because the only way I'm going to make collectors out of you is get you interested. And I think I can get you interested with this story. I was sitting in the John one night, and this is a true story. And I had well, you know, I'm a land surveyor, and all of my customers used to go to work before 7 o'clock in the morning. So I put a telephone right in front of the John, so that when they called me, that's where I always was when the phone rang in the morning. I reach up and get the telephone. This boy from Akron, Ohio called me on the phone. He said, would you give $2,750 for a 25 jewel Pennsylvania special? Illinois. I said, well, I don't know. That's pretty close. I said, how do you know that it's a Illinois? He said, well, I just know it is. I says, well, you're very close. I probably will, but I'd like to check the serial number. I said, read me off the serial number. So he read me that serial number, 554985. I said to myself, that ain't no Illinois, because they didn't make them with the serial number like that. So I said, stay right there by the telephone, keep the watch in your pocket, don't move. I'm going to go to the office and look this up. So I got all the necessaries together, and out the door I went, and across the lawn, back to my Rockford, because on the way over there I said, it's got to be a Seth Thomas or it's got to be a Rockford, one of the two. So I went to the Rockford book, and sure enough, I had a picture of one of these just 2 numbers away. So I called him on the phone and I said, have you got the money to pay for this watch? He said, no. I said, well, it was 5:45. I know exactly the time. It was 5:45. He said, I don't have it. I said, well, stay with that watch, even if you've got to stay all night with this guy. If I can't get the money to you tonight, you're going to have to keep that watch in your pocket. Do not let it get away. His first name is Tom. Does anybody know what his name was? Tom? Rump, right. Tom Rump was the boy's name. Toledo he was. But was he in Toledo? Yeah. Okay. He was at a gold buyer's place. Well, to make a long story short, I rushed down to the Western Union, wired the money, and by 7 o'clock we owned the watch. That's how fast they worked at that time of day. Tom kept saying on the phone, see, I talked to him for about an hour, what is this? I said, don't worry about it, Tom. When you get home, I'll tell you. I said, you just made $1,000. Does anybody know where that control is? Or what's happening? Maybe I should just turn the thing off. Red, you think that's going to affect your sound? We'll hear it. Well, anyway, that watch is in a collection in Kansas City, and he paid $20,000 for that watch. I wound up with $3,800 or $3,900 in the watch, merely because I knew what it was. And that's the only way I was able to buy the watch. These three books that are on the screen here are Townsend's books. After Mr. Townsend died, I wrote price guides to all of them. We've been talking about this for years. Now, almost every important watch in the United States that you can run into is illustrated or described in these three books with up-to-date prices. I only did the prices like 2 or 3 months ago. If you had these things, they deal with all of these railroad associated names that I'm talking about and many, many more. 1,400 railroad watches in that one little book alone over there. So if you're of a mind to pursue this any further, I'd like to sell you a book. And here's the book. If you already have Townsend's books, this is just a price guide to them, so you don't have to buy them all, just this one book. Pennsylvania Special, another grade that they made like 50 or 80 of, that's highly desirable. And the matching dial in Waltham. And I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of time from here on, because you're beginning to get the idea, and there are literally probably hundreds of variations, and they're all rare, probably 25 or less of each of them. The Empire State Special, you'll see this watch. Danny Goff will have this on display. Fred, you're going to have to turn your gain up. I almost turned something off. Danny called me and he said, I don't have an Empire State Special. If you could get me one for $600, I'd like to have one. Larry found one at a flea market around up there somewhere, and I took it up by and handed him the watch, and he gave me the $600. The Empire State Special was a famous train that ran a speed run, or ran a very close run between two towns back there. I don't right off know what they were, but probably through New York, since it's Empire State. Another of Waltham's for railway service. This is not on the grade list, but there's a lot of them. So this gets, when I say there's a lot of them, I'm usually talking from $200 to $300. When I say that they're a grade, I'm usually talking $75 to $300, something like that, so that I don't give you each one. Jay Gould. Those of you who know anything about past history of railroad knows that he was pretty much of, I don't know what you call it. Shyster's a better word. Anyway, this raises the value of the watch, obviously. The guys who collect stocks and bonds particularly wants this Jay Gould watch. And it's on a Columbus. This is probably one of the top ones. This has a marked case, dial, and movement for Canadian Pacific. Only one of these it turned up. And there's the dial, but around the edge of the case in raised letters is Canadian Pacific Railway. Walter Craker has this watch in his collection, and it turned up in Canada. Waltham Standard. Here's a very rare one with a little train up there. There's also one without the train. Peoria. Peoria claimed they only made watches for railroads, but they've made a few others we've since found. But most Peoria watches are railroad grade. The ones that says for railway service are the most important. All Peorias are hard to get, and one day will command more money than now simply because they're hard to get. They didn't make very many of them. But right now, people not paying all that much attention. Grand Trunk Pacific Special Time Service, another interesting Hamilton. Looks really nice. It's a good high-grade watch. Collectors will pay good money to get this watch. Union Pacific. This is probably one of the first, or maybe the first, railroad associated name made. This is a Marion. I have priced this watch at $4,500 and no one has bought it, so it's not worth that at this point anyway. Here's the most famous of all railroad associated watch. 992B. You can see the serial number on that watch is 529,867. That's 500,000 992Bs they made. What makes it railroad associated? Because it says Hamilton Railway Special on the dial. Not all dials say that, but most do. I'm going to go back to the movement because we're going to talk about this a little bit. Now, this is the easiest watch sold of all pocket watches. It was not designed until 1941. The last ones was made in 1969. Everybody knows what this watch is. Everybody wants one. Everybody wants to carry one. And the value range, as you all know, is from $75 for a rough one to $350 for a new one. In this case, to perhaps $800 for one in a gold case. So there's a big wide range. Condition is very important on 992 because you've got your choice. So watch for condition. Okay, that's the end of the slide program. I'll go up in front and take questions for as long as you want to talk. I know that the mark's going to open up in a little bit. And Aileen, if you want to give us some lights.
Where did everybody go?
Well, I guess you can see the opportunities out there anyway.
Roy, I noticed a lot of the earlier railroad associated watches were only 17 joule, and of course later on most of them were 21. When did the requirement come in time-wise, as far as the jeweling?
Well, that's a whole program by itself.
Okay.
I hate to evade you and not answer your question, but I really can't. But there are 6 periods in railroads. Before 1870, 1885, 1885 to 1905, 1905 to 1920, 1920 to wristwatches in 1960, and then the period that we're in now. Actually, the period that we're in now, the watches that were approved around 1905 that are 21 jewel and over and 16 size, the railroads will take them now. You know, they've loosened up on their standards. Because it's always been 30 seconds a week, you know, so most all of them will keep time within 30 seconds.
An Accutron, huh?
Well, yeah, that's right. I didn't answer your question, but I really can.
Okay.
We'll do the first
Roy, through your talk, you were discussing prices, of course, a number of times, which is important. I just want to make one question here. In your book, you speak of prices in terms of dial and movement. Are these prices complete with case, or in your film here today?
No case.
No case. It's just dial and movement.
Down movement, as it's supposed to be. Whether or not you can tell how it's supposed to be from what I said or not, it's not important. The important thing is that you know the opportunities and what's there. Now, there are many more watches we know that we haven't seen. And I know of many more that I haven't put here. But there are literally lists of them in that one little yellow book that I showed you.
Like on Hamilton 992, what does the C before the serial number stand for?
Well, in Hamilton, after about 30, 35, they stopped the continuous numbering and preceded everything with a letter. C is the letter that they assign to the 992Bs. They'll all have a C in front of them. And you know that number 1 started in 1941 and that 500,000 was in 1969. By proration, you can figure out maybe close to when it was made. That really isn't important with that watch. Anyone else? Yes?
Did you say that a true railroad watch has the name on the dial and on the movement both? Did I understand that right?
No, I might have said that, but that's not what I meant. I don't really know how to clear that up so that it wouldn't cause you a lot of trouble. Throughout the 6 periods, there was different requirements. They started out first that it keep 30 seconds time. And then later on, they got to where they had to have the grade name on the movement. Then they had to have, say, adjusted 5 positions. What I'm saying, I think probably what I was getting at, was on railroad associated names. If we know it had an original dial, then for it to have full value, it needs to have the dial and the movement. You know, both pieces. Because like on a ball, if you don't have a ball dial, they don't really want to watch. You know, and if you've got a Pennsylvania Special, I'll give you a good example. I sold a 26 jewel Pennsylvania Special to a man in California for a lot of money. And I didn't have a dial, and I promised him a dial. But at the discussion at the time was, give me 2 years at least and I'll find you one. My 2 years is almost up and I have an offer of $500 out for a dial. So see, it takes on importance. It's 18 Sides, Illinois, by the way, if any of you's got one. I've got the money right here. See, some of this stuff is pretty sophisticated. But once you run into it, if you've got a little time, you can solve the problems before it gets away from you, maybe. But a little bit more on that 25 jewel watch. Another guy had found out about it and had sent his picker up, but his picker went to buy some Colonel Sanders or something, and arrived about 30 minutes after we had the watch and left. But that's how close that was. I did not know who it was. Was not even trying to get ahead of anybody. We were only trying to buy the watch. Yes?
When was the first time that the railroads got together to decide to have a time zone? Isn't that when they talk about
Time zones?
In standard time.
railroad watches talk about their beginning? Don't they say that that's when the time zones were initiated?
Well, in 1883, this is the 100-year anniversary of the time zones this year. Smithsonian's putting on a standard time display, a special thing. No, the railroads began running, you know, like the Pennsylvania Special or Pennsylvania Railroad or some of them. They began to tear up equipment. They began running into their own engines and their own trains. So they internally began to develop some sort of timing and flagging system.
Well, I'm trying to remember the Lake Shore. That was their big.
That was at Kipton, Indiana, and Ball developed a time service. But there was some time services in effect. When was that? 1896. We had time services in force before that, but that sped things up and brought it to the worldwide attention because they killed a lot of people and tore up a lot of equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also Swiss.
Well, Hamden went out and made a Lakeshore. I mean, they made a watch that says Lakeshore on it.
There's a Lakeshore was a railway.
Yeah.
Railway.
Part of the New York Central system, I think. And along that railroad is where Ball's jewelers' name watches appear. Like Frank Hammond and, oh, what's some of the names? Henry or Freed, C.C. Freed, some of those. Somebody in here's got a couple in their pocket of those watches. And I didn't have one of those in here, but those jewelers' name Ball watches are up around $1,000. Some break $1,400 if they. First time one of them show up there, Henry Guinell in Sandusky, Ohio, where Don's from, was one of Ball's inspectors, and his name appears on some of the watches. We're talking about a whole lot of things that are rare. Not, you know what I'm talking about. We're talking about maybe 25 or less of all these examples. And clocks is not as easily determined as it is in watches. We can determine what's rare and what isn't rare in watches. Anyone else? Yes?
Yes, sir. I'll tell you what, I got a 1979 Batman. How long do you think I hold before I get one? Well, the thing I was saying is, you mentioned all those. I am in the novelty collecting business, which is another facet or another field of watch.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Me and Red, we talk about that a lot. We think that the things that are being sold now, and you have a lot of them on display out here. I don't know whose collection that was, but I stood and looked at that bottom row a lot. Is that yours?
Yeah.
Well, I think you're on the right track. If anybody's on the right track in here for buying what's new and on the market, I would say that's it. Animated's always been good.
For 1 year, I bought a clock a day. And so you had to buy that kind of a clock for people to afford it.
Yeah. Well, everything you got's worth more than what you paid for it. But I don't know whether you've kept up with inflation or not, and what you might have made on your money. I'm not recommending that anybody buy anything expecting to make any money, you know, but you can buy it, own it, enjoy it, and probably get your money back or even make a profit. You make your money when you buy it. You don't make your money when you sell it. You always got to keep that in mind. If you buy it right, you can sell it. You buy it wrong, you can't ever sell it. Anyone else? Yes?
You know, I had a movement out there, and it's called Transatlantic, on the front and on the back, and it's 21 Jewel number 167. And I've been told that's a counterfeit movement.
It is. It's a Swiss thing.
Yeah, what kind of a case did that go in?
It was an interchangeable movement. It would fit a standard case.
Is it a wristwatch?
No, well, it could be, but they come in 12 size, 16 size, and small sizes. Well, they were just, you know, the dollar sign's always out there ahead of us, no matter what we do. When you go to manufacture anything or anything. So if you can put some name on it that'll catch the people's fancy, that's what you do, and that's why for all this stuff. And those fakes are fooling us today just like they were the day they were made.
Yeah, I've got a railroad watch. I work for a rail. And the rail I work for, they changed their jeweling
Yes, and it was a railroad.
And it's a legit.
Sure.
And what
15
time
jewels
period?
are legitimate.
Huh?
What time period was it
It was
sold?
before the 20.
Before the 20.
About 1916, they outlawed the 17 jewels.
Everything's wrong. The case is wrong and the julien's wrong.
It was not a blanket thing.
No, every railroad had its
Every
own-
railroad had its own way of doing it, and
See, you had other departments, you didn't mention that, but like an engineer and a conductor had to have the one that had the inspection every month, every 2 months. But the section man and the maintenance, so forth, they didn't.
Well, they weren't under time service.
Yeah, they had railroad marked watches, but they weren't under.
But were they required by the railroad to
No,
conform?
no,
That's what I meant. They're not actually under time service.
just certain ones, the brakeman, fireman, conductor, telegrapher, dispatchers, there were certain ones, and they're all named. If you get a book of regulations, it all tells exactly what, and exactly what the watches had to be for these different time periods.
Don Olson on our group has a watch that he bought on time like that, and he was a telegrapher.
Yeah.
Really. It's only one the only one I know personally that's got.
Yeah. I'd like to invite all of you down to Kansas City. We will try to support you up here with your club, with your march, or whatever it is that you have. Some of us would like to get on your mailing list to find out when you have your meetings. Those of you that want to be on our mailing list, you know my address. You write me, we'll put you on. Maybe you can get together, you know, a group to come. We can get together a group to come back. I haven't been up here in years. Didn't even realize how close you really were. I've enjoyed the meeting. Everybody is really friendly. There is something about your group up here that I have not seen, and me and Don talked about it. You have a hands-on group here. You want to get into things, to take them apart and to look into them. And we've had very intelligent questions asked at our table. I went to one in Tucson one time for the first meeting, and man, everybody stood around with their hands in their pockets afraid to move. They'd never seen so much stuff before in their life, but it was not the case here. You know, things moved along pretty good. And I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you, and I hope we can be friends and see each other a lot in the next few years. Thank you. Here's some of these papers, schedules if you want one. I've had